everything. Going to the doctor, it covers the medicines, it covers the hospital. This is just not an issue. Here, if you have health insurance, and it's not the IMSS, if it's private, it's a joke. It's like, oh, still gonna help you. It's what it is. You need to be like half cut in two before they will pay you back. In Belgium, it just everything. What was the last thing that I was going to say? Well, not all states have everything. For example, Mexico does not have unemployment insurance. That's also not part of the fourth transformation. They somehow missed it, this policy, and it is my quest. My main reason of being in politics is to get that done. That's my main objective right now, is to popularize the idea of unemployment insurance. What's happening?
No, I was like giving you like
Huh?
like how you say the back to you to conquer
Support.
that.
Okay. Yeah. I think. So anyway, that's social insurance. Social insurance is very expensive. That's why some countries have it and others don't. Um, then you have the second component, which is
Social
the
assistance.
what?
Social assistance.
Yes, social assistance. Now this, I'm going to preview it by saying that I'm mainly talking about Europe now, because this works different in Latin America a little bit. So social assistance is, to say it very short, is government charity. It is it's the government helping people, or the state better said, helping people who on their own cannot pool enough resources, either because they cannot work, people with Down syndrome, for example, or people who are very sick, or people who, because of some family, you're a single mom of 6 kids or something, who for some family reason cannot go out and work. It helps them, or people who do work, they just don't earn enough, right? It also helps them with some costs. So these are very simple cash transfers to people. This comes in two variants. You have a universal variant and what they call a means tested variant. The universal one means that everybody gets it, or at least everybody in that category gets it. One example of that is the universal pension of AMLO. This is for all old people, and this is not an insurance. You also have a real pension that all exists on top of that you paid into your saving accounts, and then you get it when you're old. But you can get this anyway, for all old people. So that includes people who still work, right, to supplement their income, or people who never had a formal contract. So that's for everyone. Another example, but that's unique. I think AMLO is the only one who has that in the world. We are the only one who have that. More common is child allowance. This is the idea that all children, or better said, all parents, receive a little bit of money from the government to raise their children. This would help the single mom, for example, with the 6 kids. And typically this is for all people, including rich people, to kind of build solidarity for the system and to make sure that nobody feels left out, except when you don't have kids. Haha, then you get nothing. But everybody should get it. However, those are the kind of the exceptions to the rule. In the vast majority of cases, social assistance is selective. That means that only the people who need it get it. And that is what they call technically means tested. That means that they test if you have the means. They test if you're poor, basically. They test if you need it. So you have to. This is very humiliating, means testing, because you have to prove you're poor to them. And well, that's how that works. So social assistance is important because this actually does combat poverty. It's in most cases it's kept at a low level, so it's again not going to lift you out of poverty, right? With again rare exceptions like this universal pension, which can actually do that. But in most cases, it won't lift you out of poverty. And so since it's a program for poor people, this makes this very vulnerable to non-socialist ideologies. With socialist is kind of the natural thing to do, right? You're going to expand this. But with other ideologies, since this is an inherently weak group that has no political power in most countries, they will save on this first. If they're going to cut money out of the social system, they'll cut it on the poor first, usually. So they'll make it more strict, they'll give them less money, and the thing will become kind of a joke. Like under Peña Nieto, the pension was 600 pesos per month. That's an absurdity. So they will do those kind of things on the neoliberalism. They just bleed it out. They'll make it, they'll give some absurd conditions. For example, to get assistance, you need to work, which is a joke because you need the assistance because you're not working, right? It's the US system. So they did that in the 90s under Clinton. They switched it to that, like food stamps, for example. So that's social assistance. It's very vulnerable to cuts because it's stigmatizing, right? Because it's not contributory. The people who receive the money don't give it. They don't pay into the system. It's not an insurance system. So they're purely dependent. This is essentialismo, right? What they call. And as you know, the very word is an insult, right? In Mexico and everywhere in the world. So that's a bit of a problem with social assistance. But I'll talk soon about how this is different in Latin America. Then the third component is, let me see now.
Public services and social rights.
Good. I'm sorry, by the way, if I terribly bore you by just repeating all of this, but it's a kind of an extra explanation. So services, well, this speaks for itself, right? The government is going to the state. The state is going to make sure that certain rights that people have are filled in. They're going to guarantee access to social services, to certain services. So this usually corresponds to your human rights. You have a right to education, right? Then the corresponding thing to that is public education from the government. You have a right to a fair trial. So the public correspondent to that is the public attorneys that you could have. You have a right to healthcare, so it would be a healthcare system, right? You have a right to move around, so that would be public transport. So here the government is going to guarantee that certain services exist. By the way, I look away from you because it's kind of hard to, you know. Anyway, it's what does I say? The government organizes these things, and this can go very broad, right? This could go from sport clubs to parks to local swimming pool. All of these things could be included, depending on how socialist your government is, into the welfare state. Now, these social services, this guaranteed access, is the most socialist of all these things. This is the thing where socialists shine, so to speak, in their welfare state implementation. because they will make this biggest. They will make it apply to many things. They will try to draw as much to the government as they can, and thus have the fullest service as they can. The Mexican example will be the creation of Insabi, where what you had before was still, Seguro Popular, was still more or less an insurance system. Insabi is the government actually doing everything, from the hospitals to training their own doctors to making their own medicines. Right, the long-term goal is that everything that Insabi does is done and produced by the government. Their own schools, their own training centers, their own medicine, their own beds. Right, the idea is to fully make this state-operated and thus free. Right, which you cannot do if you subcontract, etc. We're not there yet because this started in the middle of a health crisis, right? It started on one leg, but long term, that's what a national healthcare system is, right? It's different from the IMSS. The IMSS is basically a company that you pay to, just run by the government, right? So socialists will typically heavily focus on these services and try to draw them close to the government. You could also privatize them, right? And just have the government pay into it, public transport in Monterrey, for example. But that often is actually more expensive than doing it yourself in the long term. So that's the public services, and they're an important part, because if you do it right, they are the least stigmatizing part of it. For example, in Belgium, in a sense, all higher education is public. You have private universities, but everybody knows they're 80% subsidized. So there is no real stigma to any of this. Same with public transport. There's nothing. It's for everyone. Like, everybody could take the train. Even if you're rich, then you take first class train, but you take train nonetheless. So this, if it's done well, and if enough money is in it, it loses this stigma. Because you cannot really complain if you're rich about this, because you can do it too, right? Like, don't complain about, I know, public healthcare, because you could go there if you wanted to. You just don't want to, right? But that's not the government excluding you. It's you not wanting it. The same with public parks, right? So that's a good thing. And if you can make them strong, it depends how much money you put in it. This is reinforcing. If you make them crappy, they're gonna have stigma against them. That means that the middle class will not be interested in them. Therefore, they're gonna put less money in it, will make it more crappy, which costs less support, and you get this downward spiral of organizations. But if you make it a quality service, more people will be drawn to it, and it will get better because it will have more revenue, etc. I'm repeating myself. So that's public services. And the text also mentions, I don't know why he grouped this, but the defense of other social rights. So this is the government doing labor inspections, for example, in companies, guaranteeing the right to syndicalize, those kind of things. Do you have any questions about public services? It's quite straightforward, right? And again, like in the Mexican case, this is something that caused a lot of confusion with the new government, because this government, for example, if you talk about a very controversial case was shelters for women. If you remember, in the first months of the government, they did this giant cut across the board of all kind of civil society organizations, and there were some shelters for women in there, and that was a big controversy. But what your friendly Mafia de Poder media did not mention is that the plan was that the government would build all these centers. The government has built 130 shelters since that moment for women, right? So basically, the idea is you replace our government is also particularly bad at communicating these things, depending on foreigners like me to explain it afterwards. But So you often, public services come with replacing private things typically, and you have this kind of ugly transition zone between them. All right, then you have the fourth thing, which is an interesting one and probably the one you know least of, which is personalized social services. Personalized social services is, to put it very simply, actually helping people, as in actually helping them in the most literal sense of let me help you, right? Let me carry this for you. Let me fill in that document for you. Personal social services is when the government hires people to help other people. This is very broad. This goes from helping addicts to giving people advice on how to raise their children to what we call broadly social work. Social work means that the government hires people who in person help other people deal with social problems, or at least deal with the institutional side of social problems. So let's say something bad happened, right? Your partner died and you're all confused about the paperwork, etc. A social worker will come to do these and these and these documents. In the meantime, you can get money from that fund, and we're gonna figure this out. Don't worry, right? This is very important because I don't know if you at your age have dealt with a lot of bureaucracy, but this can be very intimidating for people. And in many countries, various people cannot really read. They can read, but they cannot read complex things. So social work is very important to help these people, but help them with whatever it needs, right? The police is gonna drive by. It's gonna be funny. If you could see what house I'm in front and how big it is, you see the trouble I'll be in. Um, anyway, social work. What was I? Social work also includes things like probation, for example. If you're out of prison, let me try to show you this house. Let's see if you can see just how big it is.
Is Carlos Slim house?
They've been constructing this thing for 4 years. Like I think it is like a bowling alley below it or something. No, Carlos Slim, nah, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be sitting on his driveway talking.
Doctor, but where are you? Like,
But
where are you? Like, you're
this,
outside of any stranger
my
house?
Swegra's house, my
Ah,
mother-in-law's house. She's
mm.
gonna come out soon and stare at me and be like, "Why didn't you come inside?" And I'm like, "I don't really like you, but you know." Um, but anyway, she should come out. She does her morning walk. But until that point, I'm gonna keep talking. But she lives. I don't know why she even lives here. Because I live in San Pedro too, but I live in middle class San Pedro. But this is not middle class San Pedro. Anyway, what was I saying? I'm saying something. Ah, yeah, assistance. So these are things that are kind of invisible to you if you don't need them, right? Things like house nursing, for example, is an important part of personal social services. So a lot of old people don't want to go to a retirement home or cannot, and they have certain needs, like they cannot cook or they cannot clean the house or something like that, and the government is just going to help with that. So they'll send a cleaning lady over 1 day a week, or they send a nurse over to change or to do some kind of medicine you need to take, right? An injection once a week. These type of things are things, if you don't know about them or if you don't need them, they don't exist to you, but they do. And they're really important actually. So that's, I think, a very wholesome part of the welfare state, because you literally help people with things. Costs money, of course, because you need to pay the people who do the helping. In most, not most, in a lot of countries, this is semi-privatized. The government subsidizes it, but it's either the church doing it or some type of NGO. In some countries, this is neoliberalized and it's private. That usually is terrible, because you won't have professionals doing it, right? You just have some general service company that also does catering or something, then take care of drug offenders or something like that. That usually doesn't work out. And in the socialist variant of this, mainly socialism here makes a difference, that socialists will try to professionalize this and will try to have the government organize this from top to bottom, which comes with professionalization, because you have people trained and it's their real job to do this, and only that. Well, if you privatize it, you're gonna again contract this to, I don't know, to Alpha or somewhat, and the guy who worked at Oxo the week before is now gonna come and wash your mother when she needs it. Like, it usually messes up when you privatize this. But anyway, that's personal social services. Quite a wholesome component of it. Doesn't have any redistributive effects. It doesn't do much for equality. It still costs money, so you want the rich to pay into it, but this doesn't help anyone. This doesn't change anything about the ladder of society. So it's not that socialist in that sense. And actually conservatives like this, because this is not just, this also has a dark side to it. That is that if you are personally assisting people, you're also monitoring them, right? If I'm assisting families in need in person, I'm in their house and I know what they're doing. And I could make my assistance conditional on what I see, right? If I see alcohol in their house, I might say, no, we're not going to help you, right? So this type of work is also a way for conservative governments to basically spy on people and see what they're doing in their house, which is the only advantage of privatizing it, that you don't have that problem, and not so much, because it's a company and they don't care what you're doing, right? But the government might, depending on their ideology. So that's a bit of a more problematic side of this. If you think that's problematic, right? Maybe you think that some people just can't make decisions for their own, and it's better some maternal figure comes and orders things now and then in their life. That's also possible. And then you have the fifth component, which is the one that is the least important to talk about, because I think you already know a bit how it works, which is this general intervention in the economy, right? Where the welfare state both helps capitalism survive, but it also depends on the economy, right? The welfare state needs money. If as you saw in the Venezuelan case, if there's no money coming in, the whole thing kind of falls, right? Actually, it doesn't completely fall, and it's the only reason that they're still surviving. But it has a strong interest in the economy being stable, because it's based on taxes. So welfare state will come with a whole bunch of regulations of all kind of things we don't have to go into, right? From fiscal policy, trying to control inflation, interest rates, these kind of things. But also labor market policy, which could go quite far, as in trying to help people get a job, etc. To controlling trade, these kind of things. Again, that's very broad, and it is self-evident that socialists will try to go a bit further here, right? Since they try to do this anyway. They try to regulate the economy anyway. What socialists will do in this domain, what others don't, two things. One is direct employment creation. Socialism and communism are the only ideologies that take direct responsibility for people's job, right? And all other ideologies, if you find a job or not, that's your problem. They might help you if you cannot get one, right, via insurance, but they're not going to give you the job, not in a literal sense. While socialist government, if they have the money, will typically try to do this. So they will directly subsidize employment. They will create jobs for people. They will start building stuff just so people could work in it. They will create jobs for people who normally don't get jobs, for example. And I'm a very big fan of this. So, for example, jobs for ex-business normally, which leads them back to prison, right? You could stop this cycle by hiring them to maintain parks, for example, looking at a park now, or building roads or bridges or something like that, right? Or one of my plans, you legalize weed, and then the government takes possession of the whole marijuana business. So you outlaw selling weed, you legalize smoking it, and the government owns everything. The fields, the distribution, the processing, all of it, and you employ ex-drug dealers in their own trade, but legally now. So everybody who ever caught a marijuana charge, they'll get a letter to invite them to please come grow marijuana on a military base, of course. And you will now create 10,000s of jobs for people who otherwise would be criminals. Vote for me, 2024. You can't, I'm a foreigner. But that's one plan of mine, right? These type of things are with our government now. They have two big programs, right? One is Sembrano Vida that we talked about, the farmers. The other one, the big one, is the most controversial thing actually of this whole government, is the Jóvenes Construyendo el Futuro program, better known as the Ninis program by Ortia, which is the exact opposite of what people think it is. People think this is money for people who don't work and don't study, while it literally is money for people who work and who study. That's the program. It pays you to work and study. So this gives jobs, basically, to 800,000 young people, right? So understand the difference with other ideologies. Other ideologies will do something like, you get a 5% tax break if you hire young people, right? Or are we going to attract investment? And these things can work, right? We're going to attract this worker with the machete. He's looking quite angry at me. Okay. Scary dude, man. He's working on anyway. And other ideologies, you would try to attract investments, or you would do something indirectly. Well, this program says, okay, we have all these unemployed young people. We're going to create jobs for them. We're going to pay anybody who wants to employ them money, right? You want to hire young people? Here's 5,000 pesos. Go. So that's direct employment creation. That typically you only see from socialist governments, because this is cursing in the capitalist church that the government would that directly try to intervene in things. The other things that you will see, and this is now you get into real socialist governments, not social democratic ones, is that the state will involve themselves in production. So the state will simply try to run certain profitable businesses if they can. If they happen to fall in their hands, they will keep it. Let's say that a company goes bankrupt and they sell the land to the government, and the government just keeps the company, right? For example, in Belgium, the south of Belgium is more socialist than the north. The Socialist Party in the south has been ruling for, I don't know, 40 years or something. They own gun factories, for example. Very controversial because we sell them to bad people, but they own gun factories. The government owns machine gun factories. Or in other countries, you will nationalize the oil or lithium or coal or whatever it is that you have, right? That typically you won't see from other ideologies, that they will do that and get that directly involved in production. But that is a way for the government to kind of steer the economy, because they have another thing. Government airlines, for example, is another example of this, where the government will own the airlines and the airports themselves, and therefore have that control of the economy. Anyway, I'm talking too much about this. Any questions about what I said so far? No. Okay. Then I was going to explain you how this is a little bit different in Latin America, right? So, first of all, not all Latin countries have all policies. Quite simply because we have less money than other countries, and because it's a bit younger here. Depends on the country. And as you saw in previous classes, socialism has been violently repressed. So in most countries, this started late 80s. And in Mexico, it started breaking down late 80s because of neoliberalism, right? But anyway, so what's different about the Latin context? It's that assistance works different here. Because assistance in the classical model is based on the idea that you need to help people who don't work, right? Because the ones who work are in the insurance scheme. However, in most Latin countries like Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, most people that work don't formally work. They have informal jobs, right? Including many of my ex-students who work in jobs that look nice, but they actually don't have a contract. In all those cases, you are not in the insurance system, right? Partly because it's done to you, partly because you're too stupid to understand it's better to pay taxes than to get 500 pesos more a month. A lot of students fall in this trap where the boss tells them, I can either pay you legally or not. They forget that they won't have a pension when they're old. So don't do that. What was I saying, right? So in Latin America, governments have to deal with the reality that many people are in the insurance scheme. And so they have to use assistance to help people who still work, right? Which is a situation in Europe that you don't have, because most of the economy is legal, is regulated. So with us, social assistance programs have a bit more of a general character. They're not necessarily for poor people. Well, they're for poor people, but they're not for helpless people. They are also for workers, right? So you get things that you only have in Latin America, like non-contributory assistance that is still not emergency assistance. AMLO's pension is an example of that. The Becas Benito Juarez, which gives scholarships to all children, right? All poor children, or all children from lower income families. That doesn't depend if your dad works or not, right? It depends that you're in a certain income scale. So the government will assume that most poor people actually work. And that's different because I know this because I tried to make this an employment insurance thing. And the European model is quite hard to implement here, because the European model is based on worker contributions. But with us, 60% of workers don't contribute. So you cannot fund it through worker contributions because it won't be enough money in it. You need to fund it to another type of taxation. Anyway, that's a big difference. The labor market is so different from North America or from continental Europe that social assistance is used a lot more, and not just for helpless people, but for the population in general in Latin America. The other big difference is how taxation works. Latin America has enormously disproportionate funding of the government through sales taxes, to added value tax, VAT. Right? If you go to the OXXO, sell on your little bill how much taxes you paid on the Bubulubu you bought. That disproportionately funds governments. Various governments almost entirely depend on that for their taxes. They don't really have a real tax system, or they have one, but it's a joke. Like all rich people dodge taxes. Nobody pays it. Everybody works informally. So only way you can actually get money is by taxing sales. And then again, that can be cheated too. The consequence of this is that Latin welfare states are way less redistributive than European ones. Because European ones are paid through income taxes, mainly, which means that if you have higher income, you pay more, right? Consumption taxes are much more equal because everybody consumes, including homeless people, right? So the poor proportionally pay a much bigger part of taxes in Latin America than they do in Europe or the rest of the world. And that hinders how redistributive the welfare state really is. Because rich people think they pay for everything. That's not true at all. Most money comes from sales tax, which everybody pays. Matter of fact, the richest people don't pay sales tax because they will claim everything on their company and they'll just deduct it, right? If they buy a car, they say it's a company car. If they, whatever they do, laptop, they say it's a company laptop. Your local construction worker cannot pull that trick, right? When he buys a car. So that's another weakness of the Latin situation, where if you want a robust welfare state, that does, because our welfare states are very poor in the sense that they don't pay a lot of money to anything. You need different tax system that's much more based on directly taxing people instead of this indirect way of doing it. And those are, I think, the main differences with the European original. And in some ways, Latin America is ahead. Like this more expanded idea of assistance. This is a good thing, I think. It's a solution to a problem, but it's also nice that you people more in general, I think. I know I'm ranting, but I'm almost done. One advantage of that, of assistance and focusing on social assistance, is gender. Social assistance disproportionately benefits women. In an enormous rate, like 3-4 times more than men, because they'll be more often in these situations. They'll have usually less stigma to ask for help. If you talk about pensions, they will live longer, right? So they'll have it for a longer time. A lot of this money is tied to having children, and a lot of it will go to the mom, not the dad, if they pay it to the family, right? It will go to the mother's account. So welfare state is good for gender equality. And this is something that's never discussed, at least to my knowledge, by Mexican feminists. That this immense material side to feminism, which, if you count it peso by peso, really comes from the welfare state, right? This is pensions are, I think, your most important thing. If you want to really do something feminist, you would raise pensions, because that disproportionately benefits women at an age where they're most vulnerable, because they're older women. They went through machismo all their life, so they're the ones who need it most. Anyway, I'm going off topic. But this has a gender redistributive quality to it that usually is not perceived by people unless they see the numbers of it. All right. I'm done talking. What questions do you have? What comments do you have? Miss Mariana, Miss Sophia, Diego, Hugo.
What do you think are the main disadvantages of the system?
The 3 weaknesses of it, they're related to each other. Number 1, this costs money, like all things. This costs quite a lot of money to do. It's possible for every country to do it. So saying that you're poor is not an excuse not to do it, because you will do it at your level, right? You will do what you can. If you don't have much money for pensions, you will have low pensions, but you can still do it, because it just recycles part of the money that's already there. But the cost goes up with the disadvantages in the demographic structure of societies. Because of the boomer generation, you have the largest part of the population is going to be old, in most Western countries, which will drive up the cost naturally. Like, you don't need to automatically get more expensive as time goes on, and thus you will need to tax this. That leads to the next problem, that this depends on solidarity, right? This depends on people wanting to be together. And if you would bring out the Excel spreadsheet and make the case, unless you're super rich, it is almost always better to have this system. And the performance of this is very clear in the numbers, right? The real welfare states are the best countries on earth to live in. This is a fact. Norway, Sweden, they score high, but people need to want to do it. And if you have not a lot of solidarity in your country, if you have, for example, like we have here with Samuel and the Pacto Fiscal and this kind of stuff, if you have people playing people out against each other, you're undermining the welfare state, because you're undermining pooling resources. So it depends on your solidarity. And this leads to a third problem, which that the welfare state assumes that people are roughly the same, that they're the same people, that they're the same ethnicity, that they're the same culture. And if that's not true, if you have a lot of immigrants, for example, you will develop a lot of jealousy in this. For example, if you have public housing, right, you will never have enough public housing for everyone. So you need to make who you're going to give it to. If you give it to immigrants with a very good case to need housing because they enter society with nothing, like refugees, then your own poor people are going to be jealous. And you get all this kind of fighting at the bottom over who gets help, especially if you have societies with multiple ethnicities, with immigrant populations. And that puts a lot of pressure on this whole welfare state. And fourth, on this anyway, robotization is a big problem for the welfare state because it's based on contributions to work, which robots don't pay. So the welfare state, in short, costs a lot of money, and you're spinning in the air to keep funding it, and that's vulnerable to all kinds of things. That's the main disadvantage of it. And also, for fifth, a lot of these things are open to corruption and abuse, like everything in politics. And so you constantly need to strike a balance between guarding the system and checking on people, making sure they don't cheat, and making it livable, like not spending all your money on policing people, right? Because that gets counterproductive at some point. So one thing that sometimes goes wrong is that governments are not strict enough on this. And if they're not strict enough, you now get, it doesn't matter if it's even true, you get the perception of cheating. And the perception of cheating undermines the support for the program. So you want to at least seem as strict as possible, because then people will feel that the money goes to the people who need it, right? Well, if you let this go corrupt and you let everybody claim these subsidies, then people will notice that and they'll start gossiping and you'll get decreased support for it. So you need to be strict enough on this. Not because it costs that much money if people cheat, but because it decreases all that. I know. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, because when I was reading the text, I realized that the author is kind of evading the weaknesses. So that's why I want to ask you.
What weakness do you perceive in this?
The main one is the what you were talking about. The cost is they're giving a lot of money to social programs. So yes, it's a little bit expensive. But the author uh, didn't like he evaded a little bit all the weaknesses.
It's expensive, but it on average it saves you money as an individual. Europeans, if you compare Europeans to Americans, Europeans depend on the country, but we have as much or less income than Americans, but we have more money. Like income, Americans might edge us a little bit because they have less taxes. But if you look at wealth, like what people have in their bank account, Europe is 4 or 5. Because we don't spend money on stuff. We don't spend money on healthcare. We don't, for example, my higher education costed 2,000 euro a year. In US, it would cost 40, 50,000 a year. My PhD, I got paid. I didn't pay them. They paid me. There's a lot of things where you just don't have to pay the money. Well, if you live in a less developed welfare state, you lose all your money on stuff. You get sick, there goes all your savings. You lose your job, there goes your savings, etc. So it's expensive, but not necessarily for people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. It's better now.
But yes, this has its advantages and another weakness from a communist perspective. So two more weaknesses. From a communist perspective, it keeps capitalism alive. And if you want it to crash and burn and then this is not the way. And from a fascist perspective, it keeps the poor alive, and you want the weak to be gone. So only the strong survive. So this is again evil from that perspective. Depends what concept you're looking at.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other criticisms or questions you have, Miss Sophia?
Yeah, because you said about the communist perspective, I once read an article that stated that the problem with the welfare state is that it still like exploitates other countries like the global south. So like I don't know, people in Finland will be doing amazing, but that doesn't mean that they're still exploiting, I don't know, like an Africa man, you know? So yeah, but I think that's kind of radical to just like blame all countries for not doing things for another countries. But anyway, I have a question. Because you say that.
The welfare state is sorry. See?
Wait, what? You didn't hear me?
No. You tell me that the problem was that it doesn't solve global inequality, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that the welfare state will still exploit the global south. So, like, it's not a good thing for.
And you're gonna say something else.
And like, I'm going to change completely what I was saying, that because you say this thing about corruption, that most of the time this could lead to people, being corrupt by these programs. Like in Europe, like what do they do in order to corruption not happen? Like. How
So,
strict they.
what's important to understand is that whatever fraud problem you have is fundamentally a technical problem. It has to do with the design of the program And there always are ways to, or almost always are ways to solve that problem, right? This is not inherent or unsolvable. Things happen because you don't check them well enough, right? And in your design, there's so much, like, this depends totally what program you're talking about. So, for example, one I know well is unemployment insurance, right? You would, you would, there's all kind of things you can do. You can give people less money each month, which will motivate them to get out of the system, right? Because they see this is getting worse. Um, you could force people to prove that they're looking for a job, for example, right? You need to present so many solicitation letters each month. You could force people to take a job. Sometimes people are like, I can't find a job, and the government is like, here is one, and the people are like, no, I don't want it, and like, you're out, right? You have to take it. What they offer you, that's another way to do it. You have ridiculous ways. Like if you want zero fraud, you would have people come in every day to the office and sign, so they cannot secretly work somewhere else, right? Like every day at noon, you need to check in to the program. That's how it worked in the 70s in Belgium, but that's absurd. Um, all kind of technical. You could force people to take training. Um, there's all kind of technical ways you could do it, or you could make it again universal, like AMLO did with the pensions. He can't be bothered by checking who deserves it or not, because that would take more money than the cheating to hire people to inspect it. So he just gives it for everyone, right? Then you don't need to do this whole inspection stuff. That's another way of doing it. Not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it, but that's a logic you could take. Um, so you can have inspection, you can make the program disencourage cheating, you can make people prove it. There's ways to do this, and the amount of money that's lost via cheating is a lot less than people think it is. It equates to maybe 2 rich people dodging taxes. Like that's the same amount of money lost. In Belgium, one diamond company was dodging taxes, and that money was as much as the whole amount of money lost in the system. So it's not that much money, because you're cheating. It will be like small things, like, for example, the most common type of cheating in Belgium is that you as a couple get less money than as an individual. Let's say you're both unemployed, you will get less each because it's individual than if you were alone. Yes? Hide from the government that they have a partner, right? Because then they would get more money, but like 100 euros more per month. So this is the cheating. This is not big crime. It's hiding your partner. Um, Stuff like that. And to your first question, or the first thing you said, it's true. The welfare state is inherently nationalist. This works based for your people, not all people. So there is a truth to it that it does work excluding towards other countries. Yes. Mariana, what do you think? You just appeared.
Yes, hello. I agree with the socialist reforms, because then for what we have the government, like it's for the people. Well, I want to ask, what do you think about the energetic reform? Because it's something that has been discussed a lot these days. But I recently read it, and it basically eliminates the subsidies of private companies. So I get it why AMLO would like to do it, but I don't. I know the tarifas, like the cost of the energy is going to be higher, but it's supposedly.
Why do you think that?
it was in media. They post that the CFE is going to like cobrar more. It's going to be more expensive.
Well,
I don't know.
historically, when they privatized it, cost went up, right? I don't see how it could be more it could be more expensive, but I don't think that's the logical thing, because you cut out profit, first of all, right? And they're not foreign companies. So I think it could be cheaper, or at least it could be more stable, because you would have your own supply and you don't depend on external factors. I think that's the main reason to have the reform, to avoid what happened in February, that when something goes wrong with one of the suppliers, nobody has gas, right? Or nobody has electricity. I think that's why the government wants it back in their hands, to stop paying to all these different companies. And once you get it back in your hands, you can start changing it. Because if you talk about green energy, right? What green energy meant in the past, all the green energy that the previous governments did, they did none of it. What happened is that some foreign company came to invest in it, right? And then Peña takes like a picture with it, but he didn't do it because the government doesn't produce energy, or doesn't produce that much energy. So if you would renationalize that, not that the government is saying they're going to do green energy, right? AMLO is quite weak there, but, well, they will in water energy, but not in wind. But it opens the possibility for massive investments in that, because now you have more control over the energy market. So I'm in favor of it. I think it's quite important for the independence of the country. So many countries have their energy privatized. For nationalized. And in Belgium, for example, it used to be nationalized. Then they privatized it, and prices went up. Because this is not such a simple thing to privatize, right? It's just hard to not have monopolies in such a market. So I'm in favor of it. And in any case, I think that the majority should be able to decide these things. But okay, we're getting into a very different subject. In short, I don't think that long-term prices would go up, maybe in some transition zone. I don't see why they would. But it's overall a very troublesome topic, energy in Mexico. What we really need is to nationalize Telmex, so I have internet in the mornings. Mr. Diego. All right, good. That's it for today. I'm going to go. Next time you're presenting, I hope to maybe we can park from the other direction so you can see some different background next time. But I have to go. All right.
Yeah,
see you.
thank you.
See you,
Doctor.
teacher. Thank you.
Thank you
Yep.
for the effort
Take care.
of giving the
Bye.
class in these conditions.
Yeah, thanks.